What do you do when your family asks for your support, but you're the one who needs help? Willow's Christmas Eve was supposed to be a time of healing, not heartbreak. As she lay in a hospital bed facing emergency surgery, her parents ignored her need for support in favor of Elton John tickets. But Willow had had enough. For years, she'd been nothing more than an afterthought to them, sacrificing for a family that never truly cared. Stay tuned to see how Willow finally takes control and refuses to be the invisible one any longer. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength and resilience. Don't you dare ask us to cancel our plans again. We've had these Elton John tickets for months. My mother's voice rang through my hospital room, each word stabbing deeper than any needle could. I sat there, stunned, clutching my phone with trembling hands. It was Christmas Eve at Las Vegas Medical Center. Just me, my 2-year-old twins, Rowan and Hazel, playing quietly in the corner, and a nurse named Poppy checking my vitals. The pain in my abdomen was relentless, like someone twisting a knife inside me, but the cold, indifferent look on my mother's face through the video call hurt more than anything physical could. My name is Willow Wilson, 33 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I've been nothing but an afterthought in my own family. My younger sister, Violet. The golden child could do no wrong in their eyes. Meanwhile, I couldn't even get my parents to watch their only grandchildren while I underwent emergency surgery for complications from my husband's death 6 months ago. The doctors had discovered internal bleeding that required immediate attention, but my parents? They couldn't have cared less. Their concert tickets and Christmas Eve with Violet were their priorities. When I finally asked for help after exhausting every other option, my dad's response cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. "You're becoming a real nuisance, Willow. We're retired now. We deserve to enjoy our lives without your constant problems." For the past 3 years, I'd been supporting them financially since their early retirement. Every month, without fail, I sent them $2,500 to help with their mortgage and expenses. Even after Asher died, I did it out of love and a twisted sense of duty, believing families should always support each other. How naive I was. Tears slipped silently down my face, pooling on the hospital blanket. Poppy, sensing the weight of it all, gently squeezed my shoulder. "My friend Lily is a professional nanny who specializes in childhood trauma. Let me call her for you," she offered, her kindness a stark contrast to the indifference of my parents. The twins were too young to understand the gravity of the situation. They had already lost their father to a drunk driver. Now, I was facing the possibility of losing my life too, should the surgery fail. The thought terrified me, yet not as much as the idea of leaving them with people who saw them as burdens. In that moment, the pain in my body was nothing compared to the crushing weight of disappointment in my heart. I made my decision. "Yes, please call her," I said to Poppy, and with those words, I began severing the poisonous ties to the people who had raised me but never truly loved me. As I hung up the phone, a flood of memories crashed over me. My childhood had been one long lesson in being overlooked while Violet received all the attention. When I graduated college with honors, my parents barely acknowledged it. Why? Because Violet had been cast in a local commercial that same weekend. When I married Asher, they complained about the venue being too far from their home, and when the twins were born, they visited once, claiming the babies were too fussy for their liking. Asher had been my rock through it all. He understood the pain of family disappointment, having been estranged from his own father for years. "We'll build our own family," he'd say, "one that knows how to love." And we did. We created a warm, loving home filled with laughter, acceptance, and belonging. But then, 6 months ago, a drunk driver tore him away from us, leaving me to raise our children alone, trapped in a whirlwind of grief and depression. Despite it all, I continued to support my parents. I even increased the amount I sent them when they mentioned struggling with inflation. I wanted to show them I could be better than they were, that families should stand by each other no matter what. The irony crushed me. Here I was, fighting for my life, possibly dying, and they couldn't even cancel one concert to care for their own grandchildren. Poppy returned with news that her friend Lily would arrive within the hour. "She's amazing with kids," Poppy assured me. She used to work with trauma victims at the children's hospital before becoming a private nanny. "How much will this cost?" I asked, worry creeping into my voice. Medical bills were already piling up since Asher's insurance coverage had limitations. "Don't worry about that now," Poppy said. "Let's focus on getting you ready for surgery." But I was worried. I thought about the 2500 I was scheduled to transfer to my parents next week, money that could now help pay for childcare instead. The thought sparked something inside me, a flame of self-preservation that had been extinguished years ago. When Lily arrived, she was everything Poppy had promised, kind, professional, and immediately connecting with the twins. As hospital staff prepared me for surgery, I made a decision. "Could you bring me my phone one more time?" I asked Poppy. With shaking hands, I sent 2 messages. The first was to my bank, canceling all future automatic transfers to my parents' account. The second was to my parents. "I will no longer be providing financial support. My children and I deserve better than being your afterthoughts. Don't contact me again." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, I felt something unexpected through the pain and fear: freedom. The surgery was successful but left me weaker than anticipated. I spent 5 days in the hospital, drifting in and out of consciousness, grateful for Lily, who had gone above and beyond by staying with the twins in my hospital room during the days and taking them to my apartment at night. During one of my clearer moments, I noticed my phone blinking with notifications. 27 missed calls and countless text messages from my parents and Violet. The messages followed a predictable pattern: confusion, anger, and desperate pleas about their mortgage payment. Not once did they ask how my surgery went or if the twins were okay. The final message from my father was particularly telling. "You can't just cut us off like this. We've planned a cruise next month and the tickets are non-refundable." My sister's messages were different. She seemed genuinely confused. "Mom and Dad just told me you were having some minor procedure. What's going on? Why are they freaking out about money?" That's when it hit me. My parents had lied to Violet about the seriousness of my situation. They had twisted the truth to justify their choice of a concert over their own grandchildren. I decided it was time to tell her everything. Still groggy from the medication, I sent her the full story. Her response came quickly. "Oh my God, Willow! I had no idea it was an emergency surgery. They told me you were just being dramatic about a routine checkup. I would have watched the twins if I'd known. I'm so sorry I believed her." Violet wasn't cruel. She had just grown up in an environment where her needs were always placed first. Maybe this revelation would be the wake-up call she needed to see our parents for who they truly were. By the time I was discharged, I had made several decisions. First, I hired Lily part-time to help with the twins during my recovery. Second, I contacted a lawyer to draft a will, designating a trusted friend as the twins' guardian should anything happen to me, not my parents. Third, I blocked my parents' numbers, leaving only limited contact for Violet while I assessed her sincerity. The financial implications of my decision were significant. The $2,500 monthly payment I had been making to my parents represented nearly a third of my income as a graphic designer. Without that weight hanging over me, I could finally afford proper childcare and, perhaps, start rebuilding the emergency fund that had been drained after Asher's death. That night, as I lay in my own bed with the twins sleeping soundly in their room across the hall, I felt a tangled mix of emotions. There was guilt, the ingrained feeling that I was somehow wrong for prioritizing myself and my children. There was fear about managing my recovery while caring for 2 toddlers. But there was also something new, something unfamiliar, a sense of self-respect beginning to take root. My phone pinged with a text from Violet. "I just had a huge fight with Mom and Dad about how they treated you. I'm staying at a hotel tonight. Can we talk tomorrow?" Maybe I wasn't as alone as I'd thought. 2 weeks after my surgery, I was slowly regaining my strength. The incision site still throbbed painfully whenever I moved too quickly, but I was managing better each day. Lily had been a godsend, arriving each morning to help with the twins while I worked from home. My graphic design clients had been surprisingly understanding about my limited availability, and I was grateful for the remote work that allowed me to stay close to my children. Violet had visited twice, bringing healthy meals and spending time with the twins. At first, our conversations were cautious, but eventually she began to open up about her own experiences with our parents. They always made it seem like you were choosing to distance yourself from the family, she admitted one evening as we watched the twins play. I never realized they were pushing you away. No, I was beginning to see a new side to my sister, one that had been hidden beneath years of our parents' manipulation. While I wasn't ready to completely trust her yet, I appreciated her efforts. Then came the knock at the door. I had been half expecting it. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing in the hallway. My mother was clutching her designer purse nervously, while my father stood with his arms crossed, familiar impatience etched on his face. I hesitated, heart pounding, before opening the door just enough to speak through the gap. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. "Willow, darling, we've been so worried," my mother began, her sugary tone immediately raising my defenses. "You haven't been answering our calls, and we needed to make sure you and the twins were all right." "We're fine," I replied flatly. "Now, if that's all—" "It's not all," my father interrupted, pushing slightly against the door. "We need to discuss this ridiculous financial situation. The bank called about our mortgage payment, and we had to dip into our cruise savings to cover it." The audacity was breathtaking. No questions about my recovery, no concern for their grandchildren, just demands about money. "I told you I'm cutting financial ties," I said. "I meant it." "But, sweetie," my mother pleaded, her voice rising an octave, "we've come to depend on that money. Your father and I adjusted our lifestyle based on your commitment to help us." "My commitment?" I echoed in disbelief. "I've been sending money out of guilt and obligation while you couldn't even watch your grandchildren during my emergency surgery." My father's face darkened. "That's not fair, Willow. We had plans." "Plans more important than my children's safety? More important than my life?" I replied, anger rising. "Do you know what the doctor said? There was a chance I might not survive that surgery. Did you even bother to ask?" Their silence was answer enough. "We made one mistake," my mother whispered dramatically. "Are you really going to punish us like this?" "This isn't punishment, Mom. This is consequence," I said, feeling a strange calm overtake me. "I've spent my entire life seeking your approval and support, and in my moment of greatest need, you chose Elton John tickets over helping me." We're your parents," my father interjected, his tone shifting to demand respect. "And I'm a parent too," I countered. "I would never treat Rowan and Hazel the way you've treated me." "Never." Just then, Hazel toddled into view, clutching her stuffed giraffe. My mother instantly switched tactics. "There's my precious grandbaby," she cooed, bending down. "Grandma brought presents." Hazel, unfamiliar with these relative strangers, backed away and looked at me with uncertainty in her eyes. "I think you should leave," I said quietly. "When I'm ready to talk, if I'm ever ready, I'll reach out." "But the money," my father started. "Is no longer your concern," I finished, gently closing the door. The next morning, my parents returned with reinforcements. My Aunt Patty, my mother's sister, who had always positioned herself as the family peacemaker. "Willow, honey, let's be reasonable," Aunt Patty pleaded from outside my door, which I had not opened. "Your parents are struggling without your help." "They managed their finances for decades before I started helping them," I replied through the door. "They chose early retirement, knowing their savings weren't adequate." My mother's voice broke in. "We made those decisions because you promised to help us. We've had to cancel our cruise, and now we might lose the house." Their attempts at manipulation were so transparent now that I'd stepped back from the fog of guilt they'd surrounded me with for years. When had I ever promised lifetime support? I'd offered to help temporarily after their retirement, but somehow that had evolved into an expected permanent arrangement. "Mom, Dad, I'm recovering from major surgery and caring for 2 toddlers. This conversation is over," I said firmly before walking away from the door, ignoring their continued knocking and pleading. Later that day, I received a group email from my father, sent to the entire extended family. In it, he detailed how I had abandoned them in their time of need after they had sacrificed everything for me. Conveniently, the email left out the part where they refused to help with the twins during my emergency surgery. Instead, it painted me as an ungrateful daughter who had cut them off without reason. What they hadn't anticipated was the backlash. My cousin Michael, who lived nearby, replied to the group, "Uncle Robert, didn't you just buy a new boat last month? And Aunt Diana, wasn't that a new diamond tennis bracelet you were showing off at Thanksgiving?" Other family members chimed in, some privately messaging me to ask for the full story. Even Aunt Patty called me directly after learning the truth. "I had no idea about your surgery," she admitted, her voice heavy with regret. "They told me you were just being dramatic about some routine procedure and using it to punish them financially." Meanwhile, Violet, who had witnessed our parents' behavior firsthand, fully took my side. She helped me craft a single, clear response to the family email thread. "I recently underwent emergency surgery with significant risk of complications. My parents refused to watch my children during this time because they had concert tickets. I am now focusing on my recovery and caring for my twins without additional stress." The support that followed was overwhelming. Cousin Michael's wife began dropping off home-cooked meals. A second cousin I barely knew offered to babysit for free. Violet spent her weekends at my apartment, bonding with my niece and nephew while helping me heal. Most surprisingly, Poppy from the hospital connected me to a support group for young widowed parents. Their first meeting was via Zoom, so I could participate from home, and for the first time since Asher died, I felt truly understood by people who had walked the same path. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation deteriorated rapidly. They had been living far beyond their means, counting on my monthly contributions to maintain their luxurious lifestyle of travel and extravagant purchases. Violet uncovered that they had taken out a second mortgage on their house a year ago to buy their boat, assuming I would continue to subsidize their primary mortgage indefinitely. "They've been lying to everyone," Violet said, stunned after helping them review their finances at their request. "They're not destitute, they're just overspent. They'd be fine if they sold the boat and the vacation timeshare." Their increasingly desperate voicemails and texts continued, but with each passing day, their grip on me weakened. I was building something new, something solid from the ashes of their betrayal. I was building a genuine support network based on care and kindness, not obligation. 1 month after my surgery, a major, unexpected twist came. My parents received a foreclosure notice. Violet called me with the news, her voice a mix of concern and exasperation. "They're in complete panic mode," she explained. "The bank is giving them 60 days to catch up on payments, or they'll lose the house." "What about their retirement funds?" I asked, bouncing Hazel on my knee while Rowan napped. "Mostly depleted. They spent a chunk on that boat, then invested the rest in some scheme Dad's golf buddy recommended. They lost almost everything," Violet sighed. "I'm not saying you should help them, Willow. I just thought you should know." Later that evening, I received desperate texts from both parents, now abandoning all pretense of concern for my well-being and openly begging for money. My mother's message was particularly revealing. "We never thought you'd actually cut us off. We assumed you were just angry and would start sending money again after a week or two." Their assumption that my boundaries weren't real infuriated me. All those years of putting their needs before mine, of accepting their mistreatment, they had never respected me at all. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming in unexpected ways. The support group had become a lifeline, connecting me with other parents facing similar challenges. Through them, I met Diana, a real estate agent whose husband had died of cancer 2 years earlier, leaving her with a 3-year-old son. She helped me consider options I hadn't thought possible, like selling my too-small apartment and using the equity to move to a more affordable neighborhood with better childcare options. I'd also started a small side business designing memorial websites, inspired by the one I'd created for Asher. Several members of my support group had commissioned sites, and word was spreading. For the first time since becoming a widow, I felt a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. The contrast between my growth and my parents' collapse became even more apparent when they showed up unannounced at my apartment again, this time with a detailed spreadsheet of their debts. "We need $144,000 to catch up on the mortgage and avoid foreclosure," my father explained, his usual authoritative tone now tinged with desperation. I invited them in, not out of obligation, but because I was curious to hear their perspective now that they were truly facing consequences. "What about selling the boat?" I asked, gesturing for them to sit at my small dining table. "We'd take a loss," my father protested. "And the timeshare? We've tried, but the market is terrible, my mother added quickly. Besides, those are our retirement luxuries. I almost laughed at the absurdity. Luxuries you can't afford. We could afford them with your help, my father countered, his tone hardening. It's the least you could do after everything we've done for you. So, what exactly have you done for me? I asked quietly, the question hanging in the air like a challenge. The twins chose that moment to toddle into the room, Rowan clutching his favorite truck and Hazel babbling happily. My parents' expressions softened instantly. There are our precious babies, my mother cooed, reaching for Hazel, who promptly hid behind my legs. They don't know you, I stated simply. You've seen them, 3 times in their lives? You chose not to be involved. That's not fair, my father protested. We're busy people too. Too busy for your only grandchildren? Too busy to help your daughter through emergency surgery? But not too busy to ask for money? I observed. I think that says everything about your priorities. My mother's face crumpled, whether from genuine emotion or calculated manipulation. I couldn't tell anymore. Without your help, we'll lose everything, she whispered. I lost my husband, I replied, my voice steady. My children lost their father. We survived. You'll survive too. 3 months after my surgery, my parents faced the inevitable. They were forced to sell their house to avoid foreclosure. Violet kept me updated on their situation, though I maintained my distance. They had managed to find a modest condo, significantly downsizing from their 4,000-square-foot lakefront property. My father had reluctantly sold his boat at a loss, and they had finally unloaded the timeshare for a fraction of what they'd paid. They're actually blaming you for their financial problems in front of everyone, Violet informed me during one of her weekly visits. It's bizarre to watch. They tell anyone who listens that you abandoned them after promising lifelong support. Let them talk, I replied, feeling surprisingly unbothered. The truth speaks for itself. And it did. My extended family had largely rallied around me after learning the full story. Even my father's sister, who had always taken his side in family disputes, called to express her support after hearing about their refusal to help during my surgery. Meanwhile, my own situation had improved dramatically. Diana from my support group had helped me find and purchase a small 3-bedroom house in a family-friendly neighborhood. The mortgage payments were actually less than my apartment rent had been, and the twins had a backyard to play in for the first time in their lives. My side business designing memorial websites had grown enough that I could reduce my graphic design clients and focus on work that felt meaningful. Lily still helped with childcare 3 days a week, but I'd adjusted my schedule to maximize time with Rowan and Hazel. Most importantly, I'd found a community. Neighbors brought casseroles when we moved in, the support group organized playdates. Violet had become a genuine sister rather than a competitor for our parents' affection. Even Poppy from the hospital occasionally stopped by with her children. I had lost my husband and cut ties with my parents, yet somehow I felt less alone than ever before. 6 months after my surgery, I received a letter, an actual handwritten letter from my mother. I almost tossed it in the trash without a second thought, but curiosity won out. Inside, there was something I'd never expected, a genuine apology. I've had time to reflect on my behavior, she wrote. Watching you build a life without our help has forced me to confront some painful truths about myself as a mother. I was jealous of your independence, your resilience. I resented that you didn't seem to need me the way I needed my own mother. But now I see that you did need me, just not in the ways I wanted to be needed. When you asked us to care for the twins during your surgery, you were reaching out, and we failed you completely. I'm deeply sorry. The letter went on to explain how they'd completely restructured their finances. My father had taken a part-time job at a local hardware store. They had sold most of their luxury items and were living modestly for the first time in decades. She didn't ask for money, didn't even ask for forgiveness, just for acknowledgement of her apology. I showed the letter to Violet, who remained skeptical. They've been talking about writing to you for weeks. Dad was against it at first, but I think he's starting to see things differently too, especially after his heart scare last month. Heart scare? I asked, my concern rising despite myself. Just high blood pressure and chest pains, but it scared him. He's on medication now and actually following doctor's orders, Violet explained. I think facing mortality has humbled him a bit. I wasn't ready to respond to the letter immediately. I needed time to process everything. Was this genuine remorse or just another manipulation? Had they really changed, or was this part of a new strategy? That night, I looked through old family photos for the first time since I'd cut ties. Behind the smiles, I saw patterns I'd been blind to before. My parents had always been performers playing the role of the perfect family while serving their own needs first. A year after my surgery, I finally agreed to meet my parents at a neutral location, a quiet cafe near my new home. When they arrived, I barely recognized them. My father seemed smaller somehow, his once confident posture now replaced by a humbler demeanor. My mother had traded in her designer clothes for something more practical, more ordinary. The twins were with Violet for the afternoon. I wasn't ready for a family reunion just yet. We sat in silence until my father did something unprecedented. He cried. "I've been a terrible father," he admitted, his voice breaking, "and an even worse grandfather. I don't expect your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I see it now, how selfish we've been." My mother reached across the table, not quite touching my hand but gesturing toward it. "We've spent months in family therapy," she explained. "It was Violet's idea, and we resisted at first, but it's been transformative." I didn't rush to forgive them or make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. Instead, I shared pictures of the twins and talked about our new life. They listened, really listened without interrupting, without making it about themselves, perhaps for the first time ever. As we parted, my father quietly asked, "Would it be possible someday to know our grandchildren?" I considered the question carefully before responding. "That depends on your actions, not your words. If you're genuinely committed to change, we can start with short, supervised visits. But understand this. My children will only have relationships with people who respect their mother. Nah." Walking away from that meeting, I didn't feel the crushing weight of obligation or the burning resentment that had defined my relationship with them for so long. Instead, I felt something new, the calm assurance of a woman who knew her worth, who had created boundaries and would enforce them without apology. Whether my parents could truly change remained to be seen, but I had already transformed from a daughter desperate for approval into a mother fierce in her protection and clear in her expectations. What do you do when the people you've spent your life trying to please finally show you who they truly are? When the ones who should be there for you are more interested in their own comfort and luxury than your well-being? Willow had spent years fighting for her family's approval, believing that supporting them financially and emotionally would eventually earn their love and respect. But when she needed them most, facing an emergency surgery and the grief of losing her husband, they turned their backs, choosing concert tickets and vacations over caring for their own grandchildren. This wasn't just a moment of neglect, it was the final straw in a lifetime of disappointment. But Willow did something they didn't expect. Instead of continuing to give in to their demands, she cut ties. She stopped sending money, stopped allowing them to take advantage of her, and chose her own well-being and that of her children. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And when the truth about her parents' behavior began to surface, she realized she wasn't alone in seeing them for who they truly were. So here's the question. Would you have stood your ground like Willow, or would you have kept giving, hoping for change? Let's talk about it in the comments. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.
The receipt fell from Dean's coat pocket, fluttering to the floor as I emptied his pockets before doing the laundry. I froze, my heart pounding as I read the embossed logo, the Ritz-Carlton, downtown Chicago. A one-night stay for two, charges totaling $647. Dean and I hadn't taken a trip to Chicago in over a year. Not since Tessa's dance recital forced us to cancel our anniversary weekend plans. My hands trembled as I examined the receipt more closely. The date scrawled at the top was just 2 weeks ago. Dean had been in Indianapolis that weekend for a real estate conference, or so he claimed. I searched his coat for more clues, my vision blurring as tears welled up. Tucked in the inner pocket was a crumpled valet ticket from the hotel's parking garage. So he had taken his car there too, removing any doubt about what kind of conference he attended. The click of the front door startled me. I shoved the evidence back into his coat, just as Tessa bounded into the laundry room. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" She glanced at me with those discerning hazel eyes, instantly sensing something was off. Forcing a smile, I pulled her into a hug. "Nothing, honey, just doing some laundry." Tessa hugged me back tightly. My smart, sweet girl, how could I protect her from the truth about her father? "Is Dad's stuff in here?" She bent down to grab his dress shirt from the basket. "I'll take it up to him." "No," I said too forcefully. Tessa's eyes widened in surprise. I mean, I've got it covered. Why don't you start on your homework?" She squinted at me suspiciously, but seemed to decide against pressing further. "Okay, if you're sure." After Tessa left, I collapsed onto the cold tiled floor. Dean's coat clutched against my chest as sobs racked my body. For so long, I had brushed off his late nights at work, his excuses about business trips and client meetings, but this blatant evidence of his betrayal was too much to ignore. How could the man I loved, the father of my child, be so deceitful? We had been together since college, high school sweethearts who emerged from humble beginnings to build what I thought was a wonderful life, 2 thriving careers, a beautiful home in the suburbs, a daughter we adored. Yet for who knew how long, Dean had been lying to us, lying to me. I'm not naive. I knew the strain of raising a family while balancing 2 demanding jobs had created distance between us lately. The spontaneous romance, the date nights, the getaways, those had fallen by the wayside as responsibilities mounted. But I never imagined Dean would give in to temptation and shatter the vows we had made before God. My cheeks burned with humiliation over how blind I had been. The signs were all there if I had just opened my eyes. His evasive demeanor, the nights he claimed to be working late, but I could never reach him on his cell, his sudden interest in dressing sharper and staying more fit. I should have listened to the nagging voice in my gut telling me something was wrong with my life, with my marriage. But it was easier to bury my suspicions, to settle for the thin excuses he offered. Marlene Hart, successful career woman on the surface, but a foolish, ostrich-like failure as a wife. No more, I decided, anger replacing the hurt. I would get to the truth, and if Dean had betrayed our sacred vows, there would be consequences, for him and for the woman he had been unfaithful with. I was done being the last to know about my own life. This unraveling was just the beginning. Over the next few days, I focused on maintaining an air of normalcy around Dean and Tessa, all while covertly gathering more evidence of his infidelity. I logged into the email account linked to his frequent flyer number and discovered bookings for stays in Chicago, Kansas City, and San Francisco during supposed work trips. My manager, Brandon, must have noticed my distracted demeanor at the office. "Everything okay, Marlene? You've seemed a little off lately." I plastered on a polite smile. "Just some family stuff to deal with, but I'm managing." Brandon patted my shoulder consolingly. "Well, let me know if you need any personal days or anything. Family has to come first." If only he knew the truth about my picture-perfect family's sordid situation. I doubted any of my colleagues would be shocked to learn prim proper Marlene Hart was being cheated on by her husband. That night, I decided to finally clear the air with Tessa. If Dean's tangled web continued to unravel, she deserved to know why. I tapped on her bedroom door before entering. "Hey, sweetie, can we chat for a minute?" Tessa looked up from her homework, chewing on the end of her pen. "Sure, what's up?" I settled on the edge of her bed, feeling a pang at how grown-up my little girl had become. At 16, she was nearly a woman herself. "I've been dealing with some issues regarding your father lately, and I think it's time I filled you in." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't seem entirely surprised. "Okay. The other day I found evidence that seems to suggest he may have been unfaithful to me, to us." Tessa was quiet for a long moment, before finally speaking. "You know, I overheard something at Dad's office a couple weeks ago. Maybe it's related?" My heart skipped a beat. "What did you hear?" "I was waiting for Dad to finish up a meeting so we could go to dinner. His colleague Ronnie came into his office and started laughing about how Dad had a sweet exotic thing on the side. Then he said they were going to hit the Ritz this weekend for some special treatment with a couple of girls." White-hot rage surged through me at Ronnie's vulgar words, at the thought of Dean with some sleazy prostitute at that hotel. But I maintained an even tone. For Tessa's sake. "I see. Well, that certainly aligns with what I discovered." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "So it's true?" Dad's been cheating? I pulled my daughter into a fierce hug, determined to stay strong for her, even as my own heart broke into pieces. Unfortunately, all evidence suggests that's the case. I am so sorry, sweetheart. You didn't deserve to have this happen to our family. Tessa sniffed against my shoulder. But why, Mom? Why would he do this to us after everything you've sacrificed for him and his career? That was the million-dollar question, wasn't it? Why do men who seem to have it all still throw away their family's love and trust for cheap thrills? I stroked Tessa's hair soothingly. I don't have an answer, baby girl. But what I do know is that we can get through this together. We're going to be just fine. I meant the words as a reassuring promise. At the same time, they came out sounding like a vow to uncover every sordid detail of Dean's betrayal, and to make him pay dearly for the anguish he had inflicted on the two people who loved him most. After confiding in Tessa about Dean's betrayal, I felt a renewed sense of determination. My daughter and I were now a united front. We would weather this storm together and make sure her father faced the consequences he deserved. The next morning, I feigned a stomach bug and called into work, using the free time to take my investigation into high gear. While Tessa was at school, I dug through Dean's home office, my fury mounting with each new discovery. Credit card statements detailed thousands of dollars in unexplained expenditures, lavish meals, pricey hotel suites, even some unseemly charges from online flower delivery services. So he had been wining and dining his mistress in addition to bedding her. How cliché. I found an electronic treasure trove when I accessed Dean's laptop and recovered deleted emails and documents. There were incriminating messages back and forth with his coworker and supposed wingman Ronnie, crowing about their extramarital dalliances. But even more disturbing were the files that appeared to outline an elaborate real estate Ponzi scheme Dean was involved with. They detailed how he and a network of shady developers and bankers had been systemically overinflating the value of commercial properties through falsified appraisals and sales records. It was fraud on a massive scale, netting the conspirators millions in ill-gotten profits. This went so far beyond mere infidelity. My husband, the man I had supported wholeheartedly in building his career, was quite literally a criminal. I felt sickened by his deception and greed. He had risked destroying our family over his insatiable lust for money and sexual gratification. As if his moral failings weren't enough, Dean's reckless behavior had now put our financial security at risk. He was going to pay, in more ways than one. When Tessa got home from school, we strategized about our next steps. To her credit, she stayed admirably focused and determined, clearly inheriting my pragmatic nature rather than getting bogged down by melodrama. Well, we can't let Dad know we're onto him yet, she said matter-of-factly. Not until we have an airtight case built against him. I nodded in agreement. Precisely. I want to gather enough evidence that he can't obfuscate or slither his way out of taking responsibility. Tessa tapped away at her laptop keyboard. I was thinking I could try hacking into Dad's email and messaging apps, see if I can recover more of his communications. You know how to do that? I couldn't help but raise an impressed eyebrow. She shrugged modestly. I may or may not have gotten pretty savvy at cracking codes and bypassing firewalls. My teenage daughter, the secret hacker vigilante. I really shouldn't have been that surprised, given her incredible intellect and preternatural maturity. Okay, you work on that, I said. Meanwhile, I'm going to consult with a lawyer about protecting our assets and rights as this gets uglier. Tessa nodded grimly. We both knew there was no going back now. Dean's actions had shattered the family he professed to cherish so much. Now we were in scorched earth mode, poised to bring him down in appropriately epic fashion. I thought back to the day Dean and I had met at that frat party in college. The cheesy pickup line he had used, his warm smile, the certainty I had felt even then that he was the one. Our relationship had seemed blessed from the start, like we were destined to build a perfect life and future together. In that moment, I realized the man I thought I knew so well was a mythological creature, a mirage that had obscured the true Dean, a selfish, deceitful husband and criminal who was about to learn the harsh price of betraying his family. The next morning, I put on my most confident suit and headed downtown to meet with Ella James, one of the top family law attorneys in Chicago. As I waited in her pristine office adorned with accolades and Ivy League diplomas, I tried to shake the nagging feeling of dread over what I was about to set in motion. Ella swept in, all poise and polish, offering a warm smile. "Marlene, thanks for coming in. I must say, your situation is quite complicated." I nodded soberly. "You could say that, but I need to protect myself and my daughter, no matter how messy things get." Laying out the sordid facts about Dean's affairs and criminal activities, I watched as Ella's expression morphed from empathetic to disturbed. "I'm so sorry you've had to endure this nightmare, Marlene, but you did the right thing by gathering evidence." She shook her head. "Both the infidelity and this real estate scheme, either one would be grounds for divorce and potentially criminal charges." My stomach twisted at those words, despite knowing this was inevitable. No matter how much Dean had betrayed me, I still remembered our happier times together. Still loved the man he used to be, at least. "So what are my options?" I asked hoarsely. Ella laid out a series of legal strategies, protecting my assets, securing full custody of Tessa, and pursuing criminal charges against Dean and his co-conspirators. By the time I left her office, I had a clear roadmap, even if the path ahead looked daunting. When I arrived home, Tessa was waiting anxiously. One look at my face, and she knew the situation was as dire as we feared. "I take it the lawyer laid it all out?" she asked quietly. I simply nodded, surprising myself by managing to stay composed. "We're going to hit Dean with everything we've got. Divorce, seizing his assets, maybe even criminal charges, depending on how deep this fraud goes." Tessa's eyes widened slightly, but she seemed resolute rather than scared. "Well, I did what I could to help build the case." She turned her laptop to show me a series of recovered emails and text messages between Dean and Ronnie, each one more damning than the last. There were explicit details about their trysts with various mistresses and escorts. But even more concerning were their boasts about tricking banks and regulators, laundering money through shell companies, and scamming property owners out of millions in illegally inflated sale prices. I also found some cryptic audio recordings that sound like blackmail discussions, Tessa added grimly. "This goes far beyond what we even knew." I shook my head in numb disbelief, having to remind myself that this wasn't tawdry cable movie plot. It was the harsh reality of how my life had unraveled, of the truth about the man I had built a family and future with. "Dean has some serious skeletons in his closet," I murmured, "and we're going to unleash every last one of them." A few days later, Dean headed out of town again on another alleged work trip. As soon as he was gone, I changed all the locks and passcodes, boxing up what few possessions of his remained untainted by his misdeeds. It was a definitive, if small, first step towards reclaiming my home and life. When he inevitably returned to hostile territory, Dean would learn just how steep a price he was going to pay. There would be no more looking the other way, no more benefit of the doubt. He had gambled everything by indulging his greed and lust. Now it was time to double down and take him for everything he was worth. Dean swaggered through the front door a week later, rolling his suitcase behind him with his usual breezy demeanor, but his expression quickly shifted to one of confusion when he noticed the changes. "Marlene, why does the security code not work, and where is all my stuff?" I entered from the kitchen, Tessa at my side, arms folded across our chests in a united front. Dean's eyes widened as he took in our grim demeanors. "What's going on here?" he asked warily. Rather than answering, I pulled out a thick manila envelope and tossed it on the foyer table in front of him. "Open it," I said flatly. He shot me a questioning look, but seemed to sense this wasn't a situation to argue. Sliding the envelope's contents out, his face drained of color as he thumbed through the stack of documents. Copies of all the credit card statements, emails, recordings, and financial records exposing his tangled web of affairs and fraud. "How? Where did you get all this?" he sputtered, looking between Tessa and I desperately. Tessa stepped forward, surprising me with the steel in her tone. "Does it really matter, Dad? We know everything about your mistresses, your illegal deals, all the money you stole through those real estate scams. It's all right here in black and white." Dean seemed to deflate, dropping the document pile as if it had burned him. He opened his mouth, presumably to offer one of his familiar lies and justifications, but I cut him off sharply. "Don't even try denying it, Dean. We have proof of all your sordid activities, the affairs, the Ponzi scheming, the bank fraud, and money laundering. It's the full truth without any more excuses to hide behind." He worked his jaw, seemingly at a loss before his features contorted into an ugly sneer. "Oh, like you're so innocent in all this, Marlene. Always burying yourself in work, never making time for me anymore." I couldn't believe the audacity of him trying to blame Schiff to me. That's no excuse for screwing around with other women and breaking my trust, not to mention potentially ruining us financially with your greed. I shook my head in disgust. Anything to save face and avoid taking responsibility, right, Dean? You smug, self-righteous... Don't talk to my mom like that. Tessa's voice rang out, startling us both. Hot tears streamed down her cheeks, but her body was taut with fury. "After everything she sacrificed for this family while you threw it all away?" Dean opened his mouth again, but seemed to think better of it. The damning evidence must have finally silenced his delusional bravado. He simply stood there, jaw clenched, unable to meet our furious gazes. "Get out," I said, surprising myself with how cold and hard my voice sounded. "Take your shot and get out. This marriage is over." When he didn't immediately move, Tessa stepped forward and grabbed the box containing his belongings, shoving it against his chest roughly. "You heard her. Get the fuck out of our house before I call the cops and tell them everything." That seemed to snap Dean out of his stupor. He grabbed the box and his suitcase, shoulders slumped in what I could only assume was a mixture of shame and anger. As he trudged out the door, he paused, turning back with an unreadable expression. "You'll regret this," he muttered darkly. "We had it all, and you threw it away over some..." "Some what?" I cut him off, quirking an eyebrow imperiously. "Some audacious lies and criminal behavior that you thought I'd just accept? Good fucking luck with that." I slammed the door in his face, a cavalcade of emotions crashing over me, rage, sorrow, but most of all, a sense of release. The shackles of Dean's treachery had been unlocked, the first weight lifted from my shoulders. When I turned back to Tessa, she was smiling through her tears. "We really showed that douchebag, huh?" Despite everything, I laughed and pulled her into a tight hug. "That we did, kiddo. That was just the first salvo." We had laid the first bricks on the path to making Dean pay for his unforgivable sins, and there was no turning back now. In the aftermath of kicking Dean out, I naively thought the hardest part was behind us. How wrong I was. Over the next few weeks, the full weight of his betrayal and our paths to revenge came crashing down. First, there were the vicious legal battles as Dean fought me tooth and nail over custody of Tessa and our assets. Ella was a lioness, ruthlessly burying him under the mountain of evidence we had amassed. Still, the prospect of airing our family's ugly laundry in court made my skin crawl. Then Dean's Ponzi scheme unraveled spectacularly, drawing in law enforcement. One morning, there was a firm rap on the door. Federal agents with a warrant to search our home as part of their fraud investigation into Dean and his cohorts. Seeing my life picked apart before their unfeeling eyes will be seared into my memory forever. As if that indignity wasn't enough, reporters soon descended en masse. Lurid stories detailing Dean's affairs and crooked business dealings splashed across the front pages and gossip websites. For Tessa's sake, I tried keeping her sheltered from the worst of it, but she was far too perceptive to be fully shielded. One night I arrived home from a grueling day at the office to find her on the living room couch, laptop open and earbuds in. She jumped guiltily when I entered. "Hey, Mom, I was just, I raised my eyebrows. "Let me guess, reading more of those articles again?" She bit her lip, eyes down. Her face said it all. "I can't help it," she muttered miserably. "All the stuff they're writing about Dad, about you." She trailed off, shaking her head in disbelief. My stomach twisted. I knew exactly which articles she meant. The ones salaciously detailing Dean's trysts with various mistresses and call girls. The ones scrutinizing my neglect of my wifely duties as a high-powered career woman. The ones questioning whether I had turned a blind eye to obvious signs of trouble in our marriage. I settled onto the couch beside Tessa, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I know it's brutal, sweetheart. Believe me, what those vultures write doesn't capture even a fraction of how blindsided and betrayed I felt by your father's actions." She looked up at me with those big, soulful eyes that had inherited both Dean and I's colors. But why, Mom? Why did he throw it all away like this? I keep reading those articles, trying to find some shred of an explanation, but it just gets more and more confusing and messed up. I chewed my lip. Trying to find words to sum up the kaleidoscopic mess of emotions, I still grappled over Dean's implosion. The truth is, I'm not sure we'll ever understand his motives fully. Whether it was boredom, entitlement, or simple moral depravity, he made the choice to discard the family he claimed to cherish above all else. Saying it aloud reopened those wounds of rejection and humiliation from his affairs. But I pushed through, needing Tessa to understand the cold, hard truths about her father. What I do know is this: his actions were utterly selfish and unforgivable. Any attempts at justification are just sad excuses to avoid accountability. I cupped her cheek tenderly, feeling my heart splinter further at her wounded expression. What your dad did was on him, baby girl, not us. We did nothing to invite this pain and public mockery into our lives beyond loving him unconditionally. Tessa nodded, wiping away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks. I know, and to be honest, as much as it sucks to read all that horrible stuff, it just makes me angrier at him, for hurting you and tainting what our family was. Her jaw set in a determined line that reminded me so much of myself. He's going to pay for that, Mom. We're going to make sure of it. I matched her fiery gaze and felt that all too familiar burning for vengeance reignite in the pit of my stomach. Damn straight we are. Dean Hart could temporarily avoid consequences by hiding behind his hotshot lawyers and privilege. But we would make sure that sheltered deniability was only temporary. The fallout was just beginning, for him and everyone unlucky enough to be caught in the blast radius of his selfish rampage. I was done being the victim. It was time to become the avenger. With Ella's tenacious representation, my mounting legal proceedings against Dean proceeded full steam ahead despite his attempts at stalling and obfuscating. Each court victory, no matter how small, filled me with a sense of resolute satisfaction. First, the judge awarded me full custody of Tessa, citing the mountain of evidence detailing Dean's moral failings as a father. He tried playing up his usual charming bravado on the stand, but the damning communication records and money trails couldn't be disputed. When the order was read, I had to keep myself from smirking at the flicker of desperation on Dean's face. He had severely underestimated just how far I was willing to go once his web of lies and betrayal became known. Next came the assets and property division, another lopsided outcome in my favor. Between the legal bills for his fraud case and the court judgments freezing his assets, Dean found his high-flying lifestyle as a commercial real estate broker ground to a humiliating halt. "Go ahead and appeal, you arrogant prick," Ella said with a vindicated grin after another hearing. "More delays just mean more legal fees bleeding you dry." Throughout it all, Tessa was my unwavering rock, even when I felt petty doubts creeping in over the scorched earth path we had set ourselves on. Seeing my brave girl grappling with the collateral damage of having her family blown apart was a constant punch to the gut. "It'll all be worth it when he gets what he deserves, Mom," she assured me one night over dinner, squeezing my hand tightly. "We can't let his disgusting lies and crimes just be forgiven." I marveled at her wisdom and perspective, far beyond her 16 years. She had seen firsthand the devastation caused by turning a blind eye to Dean's misdeeds. Tessa knew the only path forward was the painful but necessary one of holding him accountable. And make no mistake, he was being held accountable like never before. The legal assault I had unleashed on Dean spread like a virus, infecting every aspect of his once thriving existence. Just a few months after I had kicked him out, his luxury home was foreclosed and auctioned off. His prized Mercedes and country club memberships were seized and liquidated to pay the sprawling legal fees and court judgments against him. Before long, he was squatting in some seedy motel, adrift without his family's love and the material trappings he had so valued. We relished every salacious news report detailing his downward spiral, from the dismissal of his bogus lawsuits trying to claw back assets to the stripping of his real estate broker's license. Having spent so many years blinded by his lies, there was a grim satisfaction in watching Dean's shiny facade get stripped away piece by piece until the ugly truth was all that remained. The coup de grace was when the Department of Justice finally handed down indictments against him and his band of co-conspirator brokers, bankers, and property developers. Over 24 charges: wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, and more. Potential penalties ranging into the millions of dollars in fines and decades of prison time if convicted. "About damn time," Tessa said through gritted teeth when we received the news, her knuckles whitening as she gripped the arms of her chair. I simply nodded, unable to speak around the tight lump of emotions clogging my throat. There was undoubtedly a twisted sense of victory in seeing Dean's unscrupulous business dealings and moral depravity laid bare for all to see. But there were no cheers or celebrations, just a hollow relief at reaching this point. Because no amount of ruined reputations or draconian sentences could undo the permanent damage wrought by my husband's lies and betrayal. The innocence of the Hart family I had believed in for so long was gone forever, a distant memory eroded by harsh realities. We had risen from the ashes of Dean's selfishness, emboldened in a way that only true trauma could forge. But that tenacious resolve came with the heavy burden of accepting how ugly and unfair life could truly be. As the storm clouds of his legal jeopardy closed in, I couldn't help but feel pangs of the love I had once nurtured for the flawed man at the center of this destruction. Not the criminal he had become, but the imperfect person I had trusted, the father of my child, the dreamer who had once aspired to so much more than greed and lust. But those frail embers of affection and nostalgia were stamped out by the gale winds of his ultimate betrayal. Dean Hart had gambled away his family's devotion in pursuit of insatiable vices, and now he would be forced to pay that shattering debt in full, no matter how spiritually it bankrupted him. The day of Dean's sentencing hearing was crisp and quiet, the kind of early fall morning that would have once inspired our family to take a drive and admire the changing leaves. But those idyllic memories now felt like entries from someone else's life. Tessa and I arrived at the courthouse hand in hand, our mutual solidarity fortifying us for this final chapter in our quest to hold Dean accountable. A gaggle of reporters shoved microphones and cameras in our faces as we entered, hungry for any reaction shots or quotable sound bites. But we pushed through in stony silence, Ella's capable assistant clearing our path. Inside the hushed courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy, part solemn ceremony, part circus sideshow for the rubberneckers baying for blood. I scanned the crowd for Dean, but he was already seated at the defense table, shoulders slumped in wrinkled shirt sleeves as he conferred with his lawyers. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of something akin to pity as I studied him. The dark circles under his eyes, the thinness of his cheeks, the unkempt hair. This man was a mere shadow of the confident, affluent husband I had once loved and admired. The consequences I had vowed to make him face had undoubtedly extracted their punishing toll. But that wisp of empathy was quickly extinguished as images of his misdeeds flashed in my mind. The lies, the affairs, the intricate fraud schemes that had infected every aspect of our lives. Dean's selfish choices had lit the fuse on this explosion, not me. I was simply the shrapnel-scarred survivor demanding justice be served, no matter how charred the process left us all. The hearing itself was a mercifully stayed, by-the-numbers affair of legal choreography. Dean entered his plea, a procedural recitation of charges was read aloud, victim impact statements were offered. When it was my turn on the stand, I kept my words clipped and concise as instructed by Ella, letting the incontrovertible evidence speak for itself. Dean Hart's actions shattered the sacred vows and trust that held our family together. While he indulged in ego, affairs, and criminal greed, he robbed our daughter and myself of our sense of security and identity as a loving household. I paused, keeping my voice controlled despite the grief that still lingered in that admission. His punishment must be severe, precisely because of who he betrayed, the two people in this world who deserved his full loyalty and devotion above all else. Tessa's hand found mine and squeezed tightly in a quiet gesture of gratitude and support. The judge, a wizened woman insulated by decades on the bench, sat inscrutably as she took in the weighty accounts. In the end, she wasted no words in rendering her decision, methodically walking through the litany of convictions. Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, criminal conspiracy, an avalanche of fines, penalties, and prison sentences that would bury Dean in a tomb of concrete and steel for the better part of the next 2 decades. Rather than reacting with exultant cheers, the courtroom seemed to exhale a collective sigh of muted finality at the ruling. It was the proper outcome after all, an unshakable precedent upheld and poison expelled from the community to restore order. Still, as the bailiffs led Dean away in handcuffs, he managed to twist around, zeroing in on Tessa and I with eyes brimming with bitter venom. "I hope your revenge leaves you both stronger than this betrayal left me," he spat out, voice dripping with resentment and barely suppressed rage. His desperate attempt at regaining some sense of moral high ground was so ludicrously pathetic, I felt a distant pity welling up again. Because unlike Dean, Tessa and I would not be reduced to a broken, hollow shell of our former selves. We were battered, yes, but not destroyed by the sprawling wreckage trailing his passing like a toxic spill. As he disappeared through the courtroom door, I rose and slowly made my way over to Tessa, wrapping her in a tight embrace. With the proceedings concluded and judgment rendered, our family's quest for catharsis from Dean's transgressions was now complete. No more courtrooms or lawyer meetings or depositions scrutinizing every sordid detail of where things went so irrevocably wrong. We had risen from the ashes of Dean's betrayal, now free to begin shaping our own path forward, unburdened by his lies and untethered to the poisoned roots of our past. "It's over," Tessa murmured softly as we stood there holding each other amidst the dispersing crowd. "We survived." I pressed my lips against the top of her head, relishing her strength and the promise of a future she could author without the stain of her father's legacy. "That we did, baby. It's just you and me now, but we're going to be just fine. Because no matter how deep the scars, a love that withstands such cataclysmic levels of betrayal becomes forged into something wholly tempered and unbreakable." "Len, why is there a strange car in our driveway?" I asked innocently enough, peeking through the living room curtains. An eerie silence fell over the room. Len didn't respond, his face frozen like a deer caught in headlights. "Well?" I pressed, my heartbeat quickening. "Who does that blue Honda belong to?" Len cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his recliner. Must belong to one of the neighbors. You know how people park wherever around here." I furrowed my brow, not buying his excuse for a second, but it's pulled up right against the garage door, and I could have sworn I heard voices coming from the shed. Pushing himself up with a grunt, Len waved his hand dismissively. "You're hearing things, dear. I'm going to run some errands. We're out of milk and... Marching towards the back door, I cut him off. "Not so fast, mister. We're getting to the bottom of this right now." I flung open the door and stepped outside, the hot summer sun beating down. Len reluctantly followed behind as I made a beeline for the shed, steeling myself for what I might find. With a trembling hand, I pulled open the shed door. The sight before me sucked the wind right from my lungs. There she was, a young, attractive woman, frantically pulling her dress back on as she sat on an overturned bucket, her makeup smeared and hair disheveled. A visceral cry escaped my lips as the reality smashed into me like a freight train. My husband of 22 years, the man I thought I knew inside and out, was having an affair. "Marla, I can explain," Len sputtered, rushing over with panic in his eyes. I recoiled from his touch, feeling as though I didn't recognize this man anymore. "Save your lies. How long has this been going on? Who is she?" The woman hurriedly gathered her belongings, the tears flowing freely now. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault," she babbled as she rushed out of the shed, heading straight for her car. "Hey, we're not done here," I shouted after her retreating figure. But it was no use. She peeled out of the driveway in a cloud of dust and squealing tires, leaving me alone with the man I once trusted above all else. Len slumped against the shed and slowly sank to the ground, burying his face in his hands. "Please, let me try to make this right. Kara meant nothing. It was just a stupid fling." "A fling?" I spat, feeling the bile rise in the back of my throat. "We're supposed to be partners, for better or worse. But you've made a mockery of the most sacred vow 2 people can make. How could you do this to me? To us?" Len opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand, silencing him. I couldn't stand to hear any more lies and half-truths at that moment. With tears stinging my eyes, I turned and headed back towards the house, feeling like I didn't recognize this man or my life at all anymore. My world had fallen apart in an instant, and the reality, as ugly and painful as it was, finally came into focus. The sparkling veil of my marriage had been violently ripped away. The life I thought I had was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated illusion. I spent that night lying awake, my mind spinning with a million thoughts as the devastating scene replayed over and over. How could Len, the supposed love of my life, do something so despicable? So cruel? As the sun peeked through the curtains the next morning, I turned to look at the empty space on the other side of the bed. Len hadn't come home after storming out of the house the previous day. Truthfully, I wasn't sure I even wanted him back. My head throbbing, I forced myself up and padded into the kitchen, hoping a strong cup of coffee might snap me out of this waking nightmare. The house felt eerily quiet without Len's usual whistling and humming as he got ready for work. I don't know why I allowed myself to be blindsided like this. Looking back, the signs were all there. I just didn't want to see them. Len's little work dinners that kept getting later and later. The excessive spending and shopping trips he tried to hide. Those work conferences in different cities every few months where he traveled alone. I felt like such a fool for buying into the facade, for believing the lies and half-truths he so expertly fed me for who knows how long. Len Thomas, respected insurance agent, doting father, all-around family man. What a joke that turned out to be. As I took my first tentative sip of coffee, the front door burst open. Speak of the devil. Morning, honey, Len hollered in an overly chipper tone as he strolled inside, not a care in the world. There he plopped a paper bag from the bakery on the counter and leaned in to give me a peck on the cheek. Recoiling, I nearly spilled my coffee all over him. Get away from me, you lying snake. Did you really think everything would just blow over after yesterday? Len took a step back, hands raised in mock surrender. Hey, I said I was sorry. What happened with Kara was a stupid mistake. It didn't mean anything, I swear. I slammed my mug down, sloshing the steaming liquid over the rim. Didn't mean anything? You were carrying on an affair behind my back, Len. Not to mention blowing through our life savings on God knows what else with your constant business trips. He shifted uncomfortably, his bravado faltering for just a moment before the callous mask slipped back into place. Look, I earned that money, so I can spend it however I damn well please. Unbelievable. My blood boiled over as the sheer depth of his narcissism and entitlement hit me. In that moment, it finally became clear this man only cared about himself. He had no concept of respect, loyalty, or commitment. Get out, I growled, fighting back hot tears of anger and humiliation. I couldn't stand to look at him a second longer. Take your syrupy apologies and go straight to hell. Len opened his mouth to respond, but seemed to think better of it. With a huff, he snatched up his bakery bag and stormed back towards the front door. You'll be hearing from my lawyer, you ungrateful bitch, he shouted over his shoulder on the way out. As the door slammed behind him, the dam finally broke. I slumped against the kitchen counter, sobbing as reality came crashing down in waves. Not only was my marriage over after more than 2 decades, but the man I loved never truly existed. It was all an intricately woven web of lies. In the days and weeks after Len's explosive exit, I found myself slowly unraveling the tangled web of lies he had craftily spun over the years. What began as an isolated incident of infidelity quickly revealed itself to be just the tip of a much larger, more disturbing iceberg. First, there were the money issues. I pored over our bank statements and credit card bills, feeling my anger flare with each new piece of damning evidence. Months of unexplained cash withdrawals and charges at high-end hotels in cities I'd never stepped foot in. Thousands of dollars funneled into an offshore account I never knew existed. Len had been systematically draining our life savings to fund his indulgent double life on the side, all while spinning me fairy tales about the money going towards investments and financial planning for our future. My future certainly didn't include becoming a depressed, penniless divorcee at 45. But as appalling as the fiscal betrayal was, it paled in comparison to what I uncovered next. Proof that Kara from the shed incident was just the beginning of Len's womanizing ways. Stuffed away in his closet, buried under a pile of tacky tourist t-shirts, was a veritable Pandora's box of sordid evidence. Love letters and raunchy photos from at least 3 other mistresses I could identify by name. Crudely scribbled phone numbers and salacious details on scraps of paper. Transcripts of messaging apps brimming with explicit exchanges. It made me physically ill to think of how long this repugnant double life had been going on behind my back. The worst part? Mixed among the unsettling artifacts were photos of our son Evan at various ages, baseball games, prom night, his high school graduation. It was as though Len was using memories of his own child to try and paper over the cracks of his infidelity and lies. As enraged as I felt, there was also a sickening undercurrent of pity for Evan. My innocent little boy, who idolized his father, had been so calculatingly manipulated by his own flesh and blood. I steeled my resolve, knowing I had to make things right, no matter how difficult or messy it would get. The floodgates of fury truly opened when I discovered Len had been sleeping with one of his co-workers at the insurance agency, Beth Kingsley. Thanks to a fortuitous Vegas trip with the work wives a few years back, I knew Beth all too well as the bubbly, sweet-seeming mom of 3 who fawned all over Len at every office party. Now, I had transcripts explicitly detailing their torrid sexcapades, hotel room trysts, flirty messages, and lurid recaps of their insatiable lust and passion for each other. Worst of all, there was clear evidence Beth had gotten pregnant with Len's child and terminated it in secret to avoid scrutiny and complications. That was the final straw. I had to take action, not just for myself, but for all the other spurned souls damaged by Len's detestable actions. He needed to face true consequences for his reprehensible behavior, not just get shuffled off to his next willing victim. I was through being the naive, demure little wife who turned a blind eye to preserve the fantasy of marital bliss. It was time for Len Thomas to reap what he'd sown. The facade of the perfect family man came crashing down, and I would make sure the whole world saw him for the insidious fraud and cheater he really was. With the full, sickening scope of Len's betrayal now laid bare before me, I felt more alone than ever before. Who could I even trust after being so completely deceived by the person I loved most? I thought about reaching out to my own family for support, but quickly dismissed the idea. My parents were traditional types, the sort who would sooner bury the ugly truth than face it head-on. They'd just tell me to keep quiet, go to counseling, and plaster on a happy face like a good wife. No thank you. As for Len's relatives, I could already hear the dismissive squawks of his overbearing mother, insisting her precious Lenny Bear could do no wrong and that I simply didn't understand the stresses he was under. I didn't need that kind of warped enabling and victim blaming. So I turned to the only person I knew I could trust implicitly, an old college friend named Claire. Though we'd drifted apart over the years, raising families of our own, Claire and I could always shoot straight with each other. She'd been my maid of honor and staunchest supporter when I got married. Now it was my turn to lean on her strength. "Oh my God, Marla," she gasped after I poured out the whole sordid tale over coffee one rainy afternoon. Tears of outrage pooled in her eyes as she squeezed my hand. "How could that scumbag do something like this? You don't deserve any of this." I gave her a weary shrug, the weight of it all crashing down yet again. "I really don't know, Claire. I'm just so embarrassed and feel like such an idiot." "No," she cut me off firmly. "Do not blame yourself for that bastard's sins. The only one at fault is Len and his rampant disrespect. I'll bet anything he's done this to other poor souls, too." My eyes went wide as the light bulb flickered on. Of course, Len's insatiable appetite for new conquests surely meant I wasn't the only one suffering his deceitful ways. If I could just find others in my position, maybe we could take him down once and for all. Without saying another word, I pulled out my laptop and started furiously typing out messages to ex-classmates, neighbors, fellow military wives, anyone who might potentially cross paths with the charming, yet soulless creep known as Leonard Thomas. Before long, the responses started trickling in. Stories of being cruelly misled, belittled, or pumped for money under the guise of business investments. Some brave women even laid bare their most intimate violations at Len's calloused hands. It made me sick. but also strengthened my resolve for justice tenfold. "You see what a cesspool we've stumbled onto?" I murmured grimly at Claire as we read each new confession. "That sick, twisted man has left a wake of broken lives in his path." Claire pursed her lips, eyes narrowed with fierce determination. "No more. We're going to stop this once and for all." Within days, the trickle had become a flood of outrage and anguish from women near and far, all united by the same experience of being cruelly manipulated by Len Thomas. We formed a network, sharing evidence and stories, building an unshakable case that would ultimately prove Len's guilt beyond any doubt. For the first time in forever, I didn't feel so alone and powerless in the face of such devastating betrayal. As I looked around our ragtag band of survivors, I saw the flickers of hope and resilience igniting within each woman's eyes. We weren't just victims anymore. We were the agents of Len's ultimate reckoning and undoing. And we would have our furious revenge. Our motley crew of wronged women gathered in Claire's basement one chilly autumn evening, the fire crackling as we nursed glasses of red wine and plotted our next moves. "We've got the evidence," Claire stated, her voice steely with determination. "Bank statements, phone records, testimonies, the whole 9 yards of sickening proof against Len and his escapades." Murmurs of assent rippled through the group. A few women shifted uncomfortably on the well-worn couches, haunted looks clouding their eyes. We'd all shared our shocking tales over the past weeks, each seeming more depraved than the last. But how can we make sure he actually faces real consequences this time? Tara, one of the younger members, spoke up hesitantly. She twisted a friendship bracelet around her wrist, a nervous tic I'd noticed whenever she recounted Len's salacious sexual coercion. What's to stop him from just moving on to the next town and starting over like none of this ever happened? A heavy silence fell over the room as we all considered the harsh truth of her words. Len was an expert linguist, fluent in lies, manipulation, and deceit. He could easily slither his way out of any corner we boxed him into, unless we went for the jugular. "We hit him where it hurts most," I said, gripping the arms of my chair. "His money, his career, his precious reputation in this community he's toyed with for decades." Nods and murmurs of approval met my suggestion. I could see the fire sparking behind each woman's eyes, burning away the cobwebs of doubt and insecurity that had kept us entangled in Len's web for far too long. "We take all our evidence, every incriminating letter, photo, and illicit recording of his misdeeds, and we plaster it on the front pages. We shove it in the faces of his bosses at the insurance firm, his co-workers, our friends and neighbors. We make sure no one in this town can turn a blind eye to the abhorrent reality of who Len Thomas truly is." Smiles grew wider as I spoke, building up momentum. We were no longer powerless, no longer forced to suffer in silent shame while he carried on unchecked. For too long, Len had controlled the narrative, painting himself as the well-intentioned family man while lying straight to our faces. Now it was our turn to dictate the story and expose him for the immoral, self-serving scumbag that he was. We hit up every community gathering, every church social, every public event with our proof, Claire declared, rising to her feet. Let him try and hide or deflect when we bear it all for the world to see. A chorus of cheers and clinking glasses filled the air as the pieces fell into place. We spent the next few hours strategizing and preparing the final steps, channeling our fury and disgust into cold, calculated determination. By the time the last log was consumed by the sputtering fireplace, we had our battle plan traced out to the letter. The stage was set for the ultimate takedown. There would be no more second chances, no more benefit of the doubt for Len Thomas. He'd created this grotesque reality through deeds, lies, and callous disregard for anyone's well-being but his own. And now he would be forced to reckon with the full consequences in front of everyone. I caught my own reflection in the darkened windowpane and did a double take. The woman staring back at me was gripped with a ferocious hunger for justice and payback that was both exhilarating and chilling. Len had awoken a merciless force within me, one I never could have imagined existed under the surface. By the time we were through with him, he would know what it felt like to have his life ripped apart by deceit and betrayal. There would be no escape, no reset button to salve his constantly growing trail of destruction. He'd made his choices, and now the world would see them laid bare for what they truly were. The annual Oakwood Community Fundraiser was always a big to-do in our little suburb. A full day of food trucks, games, music, and mingling, all in the name of supporting local schools and charities. A week ago, I would have been front and center helping to organize it all as I did every year. But today, my sole focus was ensuring Len's reckoning played out on the biggest stage possible in front of everyone he'd spent decades deceiving. "Are you ladies ready?" Claire asked in a low voice as we clustered behind the main pavilion, sending a final flurry of messages on our phones. "This is our one shot to pull this off." I took a deep, steadying breath, looking around at the determined faces surrounding me. Pamela, a lawyer's wife who loaned us the projector we'd be using. Kendall, who printed out hundreds of flyers outlining the ugly particulars of Len's transgressions. Jessica, whose tech expertise would ensure our video evidence played without a hitch. We were a united front, an army of the wronged who had been pushed too far, trampled on by one man's bottomless pit of narcissism and infidelity. Today the debt would finally be paid. "Let's do this," I said with a grim nod. Our plan was simple, yet brutal. First, we would circulate through the crowd and hand out flyers detailing the tip of the iceberg. Len's affairs, lies about his work obligations, the mistress he was canoodling with in our very own backyard. Let the gossip and whispers reach a fevered pitch. Then, once enough eyes were focused on the main stage, we'd hijack the AV setup under the guise of an important community safety message and unload the full bombshell. Videos, emails, chat logs, phone records, hard evidence of Len's depraved manipulation, gaslighting, and financial treachery spanning years. The receipts, as the kids call them. Finally, once the proverbial bomb had been detonated, Pamela would take the stage and invite every last one of Len's victims to bravely share their unvarnished stories. No more secrets. No more carefully curated veneers. This was about laying it all out in the harsh light of day, no matter how ugly it got. I felt my stomach churning as our group dispersed, Kendall and Jessica taking their posts, handing out the flyers. Deep breaths. "You can do this, Marla." Striding towards the entrance with more confidence than I actually felt, I caught sight of my target. Len perched at one of the beer gardens, his arm draped idly around a young, overly made-up woman I didn't recognize. Of course, he just couldn't help himself, even after the devastation his actions had wrought. Seething, I shoved the incriminating flyers towards him, practically snarling as I spoke through gritted teeth. "You should really take a look at these, Len." He glanced down at the damning evidence splayed before him, his face quickly draining of color. "What the hell is this?" "Your reckoning," I spat back, wheeling away before he could respond. As I stalked back towards the staging area, I could already feel the rumbles of shock and outrage rippling through the crowds. The tendrils of doubt about Len's true nature were rapidly spreading through every nook and cranny like insidious vines, and that was before the full reveal. By the time we hijacked the AV system, Pamela's stern baritone voice ringing out over the speakers, hundreds of eyes were already locked on the towering projection screens. Neighbors, co-workers, parents of our kids' friends, they all watched in stunned silence as a cavalcade of incriminating videos and evidence poured forth. Len's confidently barking orders at his mistress during a dirty video chat, right alongside timecodes proving he was on a business trip at the time. Itemized statements showing thousands siphoned into private accounts to fund his sex vacations and indulgences. A frantic string of texts from Beth, one of his co-workers, describing her fears about being pregnant, and the haunting follow-ups where she despaired over having an abortion to avoid being found out. The floodgates of truth and consequences had burst wide open, and there was no turning back now. As the soul-crushing revelations spilled out one by one, I scanned the crowd for Len, my jaw clenched when I finally spotted him. Standing alone in an open field, hands jammed into his pockets as the gathered masses' gazes bored directly into him. There would be no fast-talking or smooth avoidance today. The lifetime con man had finally been cornered, and the spotlight of judgment had turned blindingly harsh. The crowd's stunned silence quickly gave way to a deafening roar of shock and outrage as the full breadth of Len's depravity played out on the massive screens. Seeing his most twisted misdeeds projected in high definition was like a bucket of ice water being hurled at our community's collective face. I locked eyes with Len, frozen in the center of that grassy field amidst a sea of accusatory glares and shouts. His smarmy facade of confidence had fully crumbled as the horrifying truth was laid bare before everyone. His mouth hung open, pale and trembling like a cornered rat. In that moment, I almost felt a flicker of pity for the pathetic, hollowed-out shell of a man before me, but it was far too little, far too late for such mercies. "That's enough." Pamela's commanding voice boomed over the speakers as she strode onto the stage, her stern expression cutting through the din like a knife. "Now that you've all seen the harsh reality of Len Thomas's reprehensible actions and deceptions, I invite those he's directly wronged to come forward and share their stories. The lies end today." There was a weighted pause as Pamela held the microphone out with an unwavering gaze, almost daring anyone to break the suddenly tense silence. After a few harrowing seconds, Claire was the first to make her way up onto the stage, shooting me an encouraging nod. Soon, a trickle became a steady stream of other women ascending the steps. Friends, colleagues, former lovers. Each took turn at the mic, voice shaking yet resolute, as they finally unburdened the trauma and pain Len had inflicted. The theme, as it went on, was clear. Len was a chronic predator who stopped at nothing to feed his endless need for ego and sexual gratification. Tales of infidelity, gaslighting, blocked messages, and ominous threats spilled forth one by one. Financial schemes, hushed-up abortions, blatant lies straight to the faces of loved ones. As the stories piled atop one another like grisly Tetris pieces, there was no denying the overwhelming evidence of Len's unfathomable betrayals. As if the footage wasn't damning enough, Pamela stated at one point, glaring out at Len, who still stood unmoving, hands jammed into his pockets. "I think we can all agree that Mr. Thomas has clearly been living a profoundly sick double life at everyone else's expense." Another chorus of howls and furious jeers erupted across the gathered onlookers. I watched with a strange sense of detachment as Len squirmed under their escalating judgment, like the worm who'd finally turned. There would be no smooth-talking way out of this deep, inescapable pit he'd willingly dug for himself over decades of duplicity. "Give it up already, you piece of trash! Get out of our town! Lock his slimy ass up for good!" The epithets and cries for vengeance rained down as people steadily fled the area, utterly repulsed and disgusted by the horrors they'd just seen. Word would spread like wildfire, infecting all corners of our insular little community. Len's smug, congenial mask had been shed, and his true self as a conscienceless manipulator left bare for all to gawk at in stunned revulsion. Even his own employer and co-workers couldn't turn a blind eye anymore. Not after the shocking betrayals and damning evidence we'd painstakingly compiled. By night's end, his office keys, laptop, and credentials were retrieved, and he was barred permanently from setting foot on the insurance agency property. As for his financial deceptions and siphoning our money into private slush funds, it didn't take long for the lawyers, and eventually law enforcement, to swarm in and start connecting those nefarious dots. Everything he'd worked so hard to conceal was now inextricably out in the open, free for due process to take its long overdue course. Within a matter of days, Len found himself being served with divorce papers from my attorney, slapped with lawsuits, charges of fraud, and more from no less than 6 different wronged parties. Just that quickly, his plush yuppie lifestyle was imploding from every conceivable angle, the full weight of his sins coming crashing down upon him. As I watched the karmic tornado steadily consume him from afar, I almost felt nothing. No sense of victory or relief, just emptiness and the creeping realization that the man I'd loved for decades never truly existed at all. Len was gone. Or perhaps he never really was there to begin with. The grand illusion had finally dissipated completely, leaving only the harsh truth as exposed and ugly as it was. But at last there was justice, merciless and inescapable, just as it should be. In the weeks and months following Len's cataclysmic downfall, I found myself adrift, grappling with waves of anger, sadness, relief, and emptiness, all washing over me. 45 years old, newly divorced, with hardly a nest egg to my name, thanks to his financial treachery. How does someone even begin to rebuild their life from such smoldering wreckage? I I thought about moving away, putting the devastation of our hometown in the rear view forever. But fleeing wouldn't solve anything. As my new friends helped me realize, true healing could only begin once I confronted the innermost demons and fears that Len had exploited all those years. It started small, reaching out to a therapist who specialized in recovering from narcissistic abuse, leaning on Claire and the other women whose solidarity and friendship had become a lifeline throughout my darkest hours. Reclaiming little indulgences for myself that Len had always criticized or outright denied, like getting my hair done or taking a weekend hiking trip with no schedule or demands. Slowly, achingly, the stranglehold of misery and self-doubt began to loosen ever so slightly. I found moments of levity and self-rediscovery peeking through the fog of anguish and anxiety, a journey of reclaiming my sense of self one tiny step at a time. But nothing prepared me for the heart-rending task of explaining Len's unforgivable betrayal to our son, Evan. The boy, now a grown man of 21 studying at State, had always idolized his father, despite his frequent absences and emotional distance. My heart broke into pieces watching the light of hero worship flicker and die behind his eyes, his shoulders sagging from the weight of 1,000 disillusioning realizations. We spoke in hushed tones over coffee and Danish at that little cafe by his campus apartment as I relayed grim details as gently as I could. His father's serial infidelities and sexual improprieties, callous financial deceptions, the sheer staggering depth of his double life. Evan's face remained impassive and still as a statue as I went on, each seismic revelation sending another fracture through that youthful innocence and optimism I'd always envied so much. "Don't know what to say, Mom," he managed weakly once I'd laid it all bare. His reddened eyes brimmed with tears of confusion, anger, and hurt unlike anything I'd ever seen. To even think my own father could do something so sick and cruel. Reaching across the table, I gave his hand a firm squeeze, believing in my bones that stark, unvarnished honesty was the only way forward from such a catastrophe. "I know, sweetie, and I'm so sorry you've been put through this nightmare, too. Your dad, he was a fundamentally broken person, ruled by his own selfishness. You're one of his victims just as much as me or anyone else." My heart clenched as Evan's lower lip began to tremble, his stoic facade crumbling as hot tears cut tracks down his cheeks. I quickly pulled him into a fierce embrace, cradling his tall frame as sobs racked his body. Not the strong, confident young man laughing at dumb memes just weeks earlier, but a wounded child grappling with the cruel reality that the man he looked up to most was a hollow fraud who valued nobody's life but his own. As I gently rocked him, rubbing soothing circles on his back, I doubled down on my vow from that first fateful day to fiercely protect my son from the caustic emotional poison Len had injected into our family unit. If it took years of dedicated therapy or professional guidance to undo that insidious damage, so be it. No more half-truths or papering over the ugliness to preserve messed-up notions of keeping a happy facade. Evan and I would confront and process every ounce of Len's depravity and betrayal head-on, no matter how painful, until we regained the unshakable bond of trust and support he'd so callously violated with his deceptions. As the now familiar pangs of fury mixed with heartbreak flowed through me again, I gently extricated myself and looked my son squarely in the eyes, cupping his face in my hands. "I promise you, Evan, we're going to get through this together and come out stronger on the other side. That man's evil will not define who we are or how we move forward from here." His brow knit with resolution. He gave a slow but emphatic nod. "You're right, Mom. We'll heal. Just don't ever shut me out again, okay? I need you now more than ever." I pulled him into another fierce hug, feeling more reinvigorated and purposeful than I had in forever, as the first crucial steps of our new beginning started to come into focus, a path by uncompromising truth, no matter how ugly or painful, fully peeling away Len's insidious mask and banishing its withering stain once and for all. A righteous cleansing, not just vengeance for vengeance's sake, but purposeful self-preservation and reclamation of our autonomy. With Evan by my side, I knew our journey would be long and arduous, but no longer would we compromise what was right in the face of such sickening depravities. We were drawing our own map forward this time, scars, emotional wreckage, and all. Our destination was healing, even if the roads were still hidden from view. But one thing was now etched in stone. There would be no more lies, no more shying away from ugly truths. The slate had been wiped brutally clean, and it was time to rebuild something brand new, out of the ashes. The words hit me like a freight train, their impact sending shockwaves through my body. I froze, my hands still clutching the coffee mug, knuckles turning white. Massive fraud scandal, implicated Hughes. My ears rang as I strained to make out the hushed conversation between the two surgeons huddled nearby. Hughes. Garrett Hughes, my estranged husband. Fragments of their discussion pierced through the din of the crowded conference hall lobby. Criminal charges, federal investigation, millions lost. I squeezed my eyes shut, desperately wishing it were all a cruel misunderstanding. But deep down, a gnawing sense of truth clawed at my gut. Garrett had always been cavalier with ethics, bending rules to feed his insatiable ambition as a high-flying financial analyst. I'd turned a blind eye for too long, rationalizing his moral lapses as the cost of success, until they finally shattered our marriage beyond repair. My hands trembled as I gathered my things, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The constant business trips, the hushed phone calls, the blatant lies, they all reeked of guilt and deception now. As I hurried out, dodging clusters of colleagues, fury blazed within me. How could he? After everything, did he have no conscience? No thought for the consequences? For Elise? The thought of my 16-year-old daughter stopped me in my tracks. Sweet, innocent Elise, already grappling with the pressures of teenage life. This would devastate her. I clenched my fists, resolve steadying my nerves. Not this time, Garrett. I wouldn't let you inflict more pain on our family. My heels struck the pavement with newfound purpose as I stormed out of the hotel. I had to get to the bottom of this, for Elise's sake. And God help Garrett Hughes if the whispers proved true. I burst through the door of our upscale apartment, chest heaving. Garrett looked up from the sofa, his expression a portrait of nonchalance that I'd grown to despise. Lena, I didn't expect you back so. Cut the crap, Garrett, I snarled, thunder in my voice. What the hell have you done? His brows knitted in confusion. What are you talking about? The fraud scheme. I closed the distance between us, stabbing an accusatory finger into his chest. All those hushed meetings and shady dealings. I heard everything at the conference. His mask finally shattered, dread hollowing his eyes. Who told you? I recoiled, repulsed. So it's true? You lying, depraved bastard. Garrett's complexion turned ashen. Lena, please, let me explain. But I was done listening to his lies. Explain what? How you risked our lives, our daughter's future with your crooked greed? Drawing myself up, I met his pathetic gaze with steel. You're going to come clean, Garrett. To the authorities, to our daughter, to everyone. I won't let you put us through hell again. Jaw clenched, I turned on my heel and strode out, each step fortifying my resolve. The monster of deception I'd unknowingly married was unraveling, and this time I would be the one delivering justice. I stormed back into the apartment, slamming the door behind me. Garrett was slumped on the sofa, head in his hands. He looked up at the sound, eyes bloodshot. You're back, he croaked out. Don't act so surprised, I spat. Did you really think I'd just slink away after your despicable betrayal? Garrett rose warily. Lena, please, you have no idea what I've been going through. My hands balled into fists. Oh, I think I have a damn good idea, thanks to those whispers at the conference. I never meant to. He trailed off, rubbing his temples. Things just spiraled so quickly. My temper flared. You think that's an excuse? What for I'm going to say next? You got caught up in the thrill of deception? An uneasy silence stretched between us, thick with lingering resentment. Finally he spoke in a hoarse whisper. They're ruined, Lena. All my clients, my reputation. He met my glare with a haunted look. I'm facing financial oblivion and possibly criminal charges. In that moment, a part of me almost pitied him, the shadow of the confident, silver-tongued man I'd once loved now reduced to this desperate husk. Almost. I stepped closer, voice dripping with venom. That's nowhere near the hell you've put our daughter and me through. Hurt flickered across his face, rapidly engulfed by shame. Good. He deserved to drown in it. My mind raced back to that night years ago, the fateful argument that shattered our marriage vows. uncovered lies about money, infidelity, broken promises. I'd wept until I could cry no more. And through it all, Garrett remained coldly indifferent, consumed by greed and carnal desires. That night, I vowed our daughter Elise would never have to suffer the anguish I did over her father's moral failings. But now here I stood. The old wounds reopened and bleeding anew. White-hot rage roiled in my chest like lava. "When were you planning to tell me, Garrett? Or Elise?" I hissed through gritted teeth. He grimaced like a cornered rat. I don't know. I thought I could fix this before." My palm whipped across his cheek with a resounding crack. Garrett reeled back, stunned. "Don't you dare invoke our daughter's name with your wretched lies," I snarled. "Not after you jeopardized everything we have, everything I sacrificed my career for." I loomed over him, trembling with fury. "She worships you, Garrett. How could you put her through such anguish again?" Shame and guilt contorted his features, but I felt no sympathy, just disgust at his moral cowardice. He was the personification of every fear that kept me up at night, dreading the day his deceit resurfaced to torment our little girl. Suddenly, Garrett seemed to crumple under my withering glare. I watched impassively as he sank onto the couch, burying his face in his hands, shoulders heaving. I stood rooted for a long moment, then turned and strode out without a backwards glance. The first tears streamed down my cheeks as the magnitude of his latest betrayal hit home. I would protect Elise, no matter what inner demons I had to confront from our shattered past. I found Elise hunched over her laptop at the kitchen counter, fingers furiously tapping away. Her brow furrowed in concentration as she navigated the storm of teenage life. "Hi, honey," I said gently, not wanting to startle her. "Everything okay?" Elise looked up with a weary smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, Mom. Yeah, just working on this stupid group project." I winced inwardly at her haggard expression, the telltale signs of adolescent stress etched into her young features. If only I could shield her from such burdens. Fighting the urge to pull her into a warm embrace, I gestured to the laptop screen. "What's the project about?" "Environmental science," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "We're analyzing the ecological impacts of commercial farming, but my partners keep blowing off meetings and missing deadlines." My heart ached to see her so overwhelmed. Elise had always been a diligent student, meticulously completing assignments well before they were due. But these past few months, the workload seemed to be taking a heavy toll. "I'm so sorry, Elle. That's really unfair to you." She shrugged listlessly. "It's whatever. I'm used to carrying the load at this point." Those words cut deep, a brutal reminder that once again I'd failed to protect her from unnecessary hardship. Just like that night years ago when she overheard Garrett and I screaming at each other. Swallowing hard, I forced a reassuring smile. "Why don't you take a break? We could watch a movie. Just the two of us." Elise hesitated, chewing her lip in that adorably pensive way she had since childhood. Finally, she spoke in a small voice that shattered my heart anew. Have you noticed people have been treating me differently lately?" My breath caught in my throat as she continued. "It's like they go out of their way to exclude me, whispering behind my back." She hugged her arms, suddenly looking so small and vulnerable. Did I do something wrong, Mom?" White-hot anger flared within me, aimed directly at the monstrous coward who'd brought such misery into our lives. I wanted nothing more than to rush over and enfold Elise in my arms, shielding her from this fresh betrayal. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Couldn't risk tainting her innocence before I fully grasped the serpentine depths of her father's transgressions. Suppressing my rage, I crossed over and placed my hands on her slender shoulders. "Listen to me, Elise," I said firmly. "You are the most kind-hearted, brilliant young woman I know, and anyone who treats you with anything less than respect doesn't deserve a second of your time or energy." She gazed up at me with those soulful eyes, silently pleading for reassurance and guidance. In that moment, I yearned to lay bare the sordid truth haunting our family once more. But I held my tongue, forcing a warm smile instead. "Trust me, honey, you haven't done anything wrong. Those people are just small-minded and intimidated by your spirit." I gently brushed a tendril of hair from her face. Bullies always lash out at the strong, the special ones who shine too brightly. Slowly, the tension drained from Elise's posture, her eyes regaining a spark of their familiar radiant self. "Thanks, Mom," she murmured, managing a small smile. I really needed to hear that. As she turned back to her work, I could no longer suppress the storm of conflicted emotions roiling within. Garrett would be made to answer for every one of Elise's tears, every shred of hardship he'd callously inflicted. My titanic quest for justice had only just begun. The next morning, I strode into my office at Mercy General with a renewed sense of purpose burning in my chest. I had to get to the bottom of Garrett's tangled web before it collapsed on our family. Sinking into my desk chair, I pulled up his name on my computer, grimly scanning the search results. Article after damning article detailed a shocking saga of fraud, deception, and shattered lives. Multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme, offshore accounts, disgraced hedge fund manager. My stomach twisted as I read about investors and retirees left destitute, life savings siphoned away by Garrett's unquenchable greed. How could he have been so heartlessly reckless, so morally bankrupt? One particularly lurid piece caught my eye. An exposé from a local paper written by a journalist named Alexis Harmon. I vaguely recalled her as an up-and-coming reporter known for her uncompromising pursuit of the truth. Perhaps she could help unravel this sordid tangle. I quickly jotted down her contact details, resolving to reach out shortly. But first, one other avenue required exploring. I leaned back, worrying my lower lip as I typed out a familiar name, Malcolm Brooks. One of Garrett's closest colleagues during his heyday on Wall Street, Brooks had been disgraced a few years back in an insider trading scandal. He and Garrett had been thick as thieves until Brooks landed in prison while Garrett escaped culpability through dumb luck and clever maneuvering. If anyone had insight into the depravity Garrett was capable of, it was Malcolm. A short while later, my phone buzzed with a New York area code. Taking a steadying breath, I accepted the call. Malcolm Brooks speaking. Mr. Brooks, I said evenly. This is Lena Barkley, Garrett Hughes' wife. A momentary silence crackled over the line before he responded, surprise tinging his gruff tone. Well, isn't this a blast from the past? To what do I owe the pleasure, Mrs. Barkley? I paused, weighing my words carefully. I think you know exactly why I'm calling. Another beat of silence before a low, bitter chuckle. So you finally caught a glimpse of that worm's true colors, did you? Can't say I'm surprised. Garrett Hughes was always 2 shakes away from an ethical freefall. My breath caught in my throat at his venom-laced words, the pieces falling into sickening clarity. All those years ago, beneath my willful ignorance, I must have sensed Garrett's capacity for such monumental betrayal. That's what poisoned our relationship, our family, from the very start. I swallowed hard against the lump of guilt burning in my throat. Mr. Brooks, I need your help to undo the damage he's caused, for my daughter's sake. Walk me through everything you know. He made a low, scoffing noise. Of course, wouldn't want little Garrett Jr. growing up with Daddy's stench all over her. His cruel words lanced straight through me like jagged shards of ice, but I gritted my teeth, forcing my voice to remain steady. Please, Malcolm, I understand if you hate Garrett, but don't take that out on my child. She's completely innocent in all this. A tense pause stretched between us before he finally sighed, relenting. You're right. I apologize, Ty. That was uncalled for. I leaned forward, clutching the phone tightly. So you'll help me bring him down before anyone else gets hurt? Another weighted pause before he muttered. Yeah, I'll help you burn that snake straight to the ground. Spine ramrod straight, I listened with cold determination as Malcolm laid bare the full, sickening scope of Garrett's depravity. Breached ethics, illegal trades, hollowed out companies, and ruined lives littering his path like grisly roadkill. A white-hot mixture of rage, disgust, and bone-deep determination blazed within me by the time he finished. Garrett had hurt so many people, stolen their futures and sense of security through cold, calculated avarice. But I would be damned if he stole those things from Elise and me again. No more lies, no more running, no more hollow excuses. The time for my husband's reckoning had finally come. And I would be standing watch, clear-eyed and uncompromising when the hammer fell. You can't be serious, Mom. Elise gaped at me, eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hurt. I steeled myself, fighting to keep my expression neutral. I'm afraid I am, honey. I reached across the kitchen table, gently grasping her hand. This is the only way to stop your father from inflicting more damage. She yanked her hand back, shaking her head vehemently. But going public like that? Dragging his name through the mud? He did this to himself, Elise. I fought to keep my voice steady against the growing tide of anguish welling within me. Your father's greed and selfishness put us in this position, not me. Elise shot up from her chair, whirling away with her arms hugged tightly across her chest, the universal gesture of wounded vulnerability. You always saw the worst in him, even when he was trying his best. Maybe that's why he felt like he couldn't come to us. The accusations sliced deep, dredging up years of unresolved guilt over the disintegration of our family unit. My fists clenched at my sides as I struggled against the urge to snap back in volatile defensiveness. This wasn't about me and Garrett. It was about protecting our daughter from being collateral damage in his crusade of lies. Drawing a steadying breath, I rose and crossed over to where she stood, trembling with her back towards me. Elise, look at me. I pitched my voice in that soft maternal tone that never failed to soothe her troubles as a child. You need to understand how dangerously far your father has gone this time. Slowly, achingly, she turned to face me, eyes glistening, lip quivering in a valiant struggle to maintain her composure. All those people he's hurt, the lives he's ruined. I fought against the lump swelling in my own throat. If I don't stop him now, we could lose everything. Our home, your college fund, my practice, everything we've worked so hard to build. A lone teardrop traced down Elise's porcelain cheek as the gravity of my words sank in. Wordlessly, I pulled her into a fierce embrace, cradling her head against my chest while she shuddered with muffled sobs. We stayed like that for countless moments, mother and daughter united against the maelstrom threatening to rip our family asunder once more. At last, Elise drew back, sniffling as she swiped at her damp cheeks. Her eyes still shone with unspeakable hurt, but now reflected a glimmer of dawning resolution. Okay, she said in a small but steady voice. If this is the only way to make Dad face the truth, I'm in. A fragile sense of hope bloomed in my chest, quickly tempered by lingering dread. I wish there was another way, Elise. Truly I do. But your father crossed a line this time that can't be ignored or undone. Marshalling my own inner reserves of courage, I drew myself up to my full height. We're going to work closely with my contacts, a tenacious reporter and one of your father's most embittered former colleagues. Together, we're going to systematically unravel and expose every sordid thread of his fraud to the public. Elise's expression hardened with grim determination, aging her well beyond her 16 years. Then let's get to work on bringing Dad's crimes to light, she said in a steely tone that would have made me proud under any other circumstances. No more lies. No more protecting the Garrett Hughes everyone thinks they know. She extended her hand in a symbolic gesture of familial solidarity. It's time he faced the consequences for who he really is. Our eyes locked, two affronted warriors bound by unbreakable blood and shared betrayal, vowing to settle an overdue personal reckoning. Squaring my shoulders, I grasped her hand in an unbreakable filial vice. Agreed. It's finally time for the world to meet the real Garrett Hughes. And on that fateful day, the wheels of my husband's inevitable downfall were finally set into irreversible motion. The rhythmic tapping of my foot matched the pounding of my pulse as I sat tensely watching the clock. Any minute now, Alexis Harmon's blistering exposé on Garrett's crimes would go live on the Hartford Chronicle's website. Elise shifted next to me on the sofa, her own restless energy bleeding through. A myriad of emotions flickered across her face. Anger, sadness, trepidation. My heart ached to see the loss of her youthful innocence playing out so vividly. Squeezing her hand, I gave what I hoped was a reassuring smile. It's going to be okay, honey? She managed a wan nod, lips pressed into a grim line. Her phone buzzed, and she quickly silenced it, no doubt responding to yet another concerned message from a friend who'd inevitably seen the firestorm brewing on social media. Suddenly, my own phone rang, the call I'd been bracing for. Drawing a fortifying breath, I accepted and brought it to my ear. It's done. Alexis Harmon's crisp voice sounded tinny but resolute. The article just went live, complete with that paper trail from your source detailing every sordid dime Garrett pocketed illegally over the years. Thank you, Alexis, I said, squeezing Elise's hand tighter. You have no idea how much this means to us. Don't thank me yet, she replied grimly. This is just the opening salvo. Brace yourselves, Garrett's world is about to go nuclear. No sooner had she spoken than my laptop pinged with a new email notification. The subject line alone was enough to drain my face of all remaining color. Disgraced money manager Garrett Hughes orchestrated a $120 million Ponzi scheme. I drew a shuddering breath as the damning article's contents filled the screen. A masterfully crafted tapestry of cold, irrefutable facts meticulously unraveling my husband's litany of securities fraud, embezzlement, and brazen deception. Elise peered over, hand flying to muffle a horrified gasp as she digested the sheer enormity of Garrett's treachery. Of how his unchecked avarice had defrauded innocent pensioners of their life savings and irreparably shattered the finances of countless households, all while he lived in unrepentant opulence, utterly devoid of conscience. "Oh my God," she choked out, hot tears spilling down her cheeks. "All those people, how could he?" My own grief and revulsion warred with a perverse sense of grim vindication. For far too long, Garrett's fortress of lies had tainted and contaminated those he claimed to love most. Now, at long last, the floodgates had finally burst open, a searing light shining upon the bottomless pit of deceit and moral bankruptcy he'd chosen to wallow in. Clutching my daughter's trembling form, I could only watch numbly as the first furious reactions began rolling in. Outraged tweets and Facebook rants from defrauded victims and scandalized observers alike. One particularly visceral comment seared itself into my memory. "Garrett Hughes is a vile, avaricious monster who deserves to rot in jail for the rest of his miserable life." Far from objecting, I found myself silently agreeing. How could I not, after laying my eyes upon the full, grotesque tapestry of my husband's perfidy? The shattered futures, ruined families, and trail of lives callously discarded in his rapacious wake. For so long, I deluded myself into believing I could redeem the shadowed remnants of the man I once loved. That faint glimmers of decency still resided within Garrett's withered soul. But confronted with such nightmarish evidence of his depravity, I realized I'd been clinging to a fantasy, a desperate mirage of the husband and father he should have been. The truth was more brutal, more horrifically absolute. Garrett Hughes was a pathological con man without a shred of empathy or remorse, and he needed to be stopped before his poison seeped into any more innocent lives. The reckoning was nigh. As the first bombshell detonated across the mediascape, I could only steel my resolve for the seismic upheavals still to come. No more turning away, no more deluding myself about second chances, only hard truths and the personal justice I'd fought so hard to deliver. The pounding on the front door echoed through the apartment like a judge's gavel. Elise and I exchanged a loaded glance, her eyes still rimmed with red from the night's endless tears. "Stay here," I murmured, rising to my feet on legs that trembled ever so slightly. With a fortifying breath, I crossed over and pulled open the door. Two grim-faced U.S. Marshals stood on the other side, badges glinting in the dim hallway light. "Mrs. Lena Barkley?" the taller one asked in a flat, no-nonsense tone. I lifted my chin, anger and vindication warring within me. "That's me. I assume you're here about my husband, Garrett Hughes?" "We have a federal warrant for his arrest," the second marshal stated, brandishing a sheaf of papers. "Our sources indicate he was last seen at this residence. Where is he?" An icy chill lanced through me, not of fear, but of sheer disgust that Garrett would potentially use our home as a refuge after his sickening criminal acts were laid bare. Grinding my teeth, I jerked my head towards the hallway. "See for yourselves." The two men brushed past me, fanning out with practiced efficiency. One whistled sharply as they entered the living area, his partner quickly taking up a defensive stance. "Target sighted." I followed their gaze to the corner of the room, and felt a swell of revulsion crest within me. There sat the disgraced shadow of my husband, slumped against the wall in his silk bathrobe and stained undershirt, an open bottle of gin clutched in his trembling hands. Garrett squinted blearily up at the approaching marshals, a pathetic, disheveled mockery of the suave, confident operator he'd once fancied himself. As they hauled him to his feet, the unmistakable reek of sour booze and failure assaulted my nostrils. "Garrett William Hughes," the first marshal barked, slapping cuffs around his limp wrists. "You are under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and grand larceny charges. You have the right to remain silent." Elise emerged from the hallway, eyes blazing with equal parts loathing and raw hurt as she took in her fallen father's pathetic state. "Mom," she whispered from the corner of her mouth, sounding almost childlike. "Was this really necessary, parading him out like some common criminal?" Another wave of anger swelled in my breast, this one tinged with protectiveness over my daughter's lingering innocence. With 3 long strides, I crossed over to stand mere inches from Garrett's sagging, swaying form. "Look at her," I spat, jabbing a finger towards Elise's stricken face. "Look at the anguish you've put this beautiful girl through, you selfish bastard." His head lolled up, bloodshot eyes struggling to focus on our enraged features. "Lilina? Elise? Save it, Garrett," I snarled, revolted by his meager attempt at drunken contrition. "We don't want to hear any more of your lies." Elise stepped forward then, every ounce of her petite frame radiating white-hot fury. "Do you have any idea how many people's lives you destroyed, all for a bigger penthouse and sports cars?" Her voice dripped with caustic venom. "You're a pathetically greedy, soulless husk of a human being." Garrett recoiled as if struck, the haze of inebriation doing nothing to mask the spasm of naked shame contorting his features. But it wasn't remotely enough to temper the flames of disgust consuming me from the inside out. "You're right, Elise," I seethed, unable to tear my disgusted glare from his slack, pitiful visage. "He doesn't deserve a single ounce more of our anguish or tears." Straightening my spine, I fixed him with eyes of purest ice. "Take him away, officers, and if I never have to lay eyes on this wretched, morally bankrupt husk again, it'll be too soon." Yet as the marshals wrestled the handcuffed Garrett towards the door, our splintered family's legacy of generational trauma festered in the air between us, like an open wound. Gathering Elise into a protective embrace, I watched with a heady swirl of sadness, rage, and grim resolve as my husband was hauled away towards the harsh judgment he'd so ruthlessly courted. There would be no more lies, no more hollow platitudes, or desperate 11th-hour appeals for forgiveness. Only the cold and bitter fruit born of his voracious avarice. As the door swung shut behind Garrett Hughes, severing him from our lives forever, a solitary thought echoed through my mind. Justice, long overdue, had finally been served. 6 months later. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window, bathing the room in a warm, rejuvenating glow. I sipped my coffee, savoring the rich aroma and tranquil silence. So much had changed, yet it felt like lifting a crushing weight from my shoulders. The financial fallout from Garrett's crimes had been severe. Between the court-ordered restitutions and legal fees, our prosperous lifestyle quickly became a memory. But I didn't lament its passing, not when I finally felt liberated from his toxic legacy. Elise's footsteps padded into the kitchen, shattering the fragile quiet. Her eyes were puffy from another night of processing the seismic shifts in our lives. But a small, peaceful smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. "Morning, Mom." I returned the smile, chest swelling with maternal pride. "Good morning, sweetheart." Gesturing to the stack of college brochures scattered across the table, I arched an eyebrow. "Anything catching your eye?" Elise sank into the chair opposite me, worrying her lower lip in that familiar pensive way. "A few possibilities. The scholarship money definitely helps expand my options." My heart clenched, guilt rapidly dousing the warm glow. If not for Garrett's catastrophic greed, Elise's application process wouldn't be weighed down by such pragmatism. "Honey, I'm so sorry you even have to worry about." "Stop," she cut me off firmly, that fierce spark shining through once more. "What's done is done, remember? We're not going to keep torturing ourselves over Dad's mistakes." I blinked, caught off guard by her adamant maturity. When had my little girl grown into such a resilient, self-possessed young woman? Reaching across the table, I gave her hand an affectionate squeeze. "You're right. We've finally exorcised that demon from our lives. No more looking back." Elise squeezed back, her warm smile broadening. "Exactly. We've got a fresh start ahead. Just you and me, Mom. Like it's always been." My breath hitched at the swell of emotions rushing through me. She was right. Through all the tumult and betrayal, our bond had remained unbreakable, an indomitable constant. No matter how deeply Garrett's deceit had burrowed, he could never extinguish the profound, unconditional love between a mother and her daughter. Nodding fiercely, I blinked back nascent tears of gratitude and release. "You and me against the world, kiddo. Always and forever." Elise's radiant smile was all the assurance I needed that we'd persevere, stronger, wiser, and steeled against any future maelstroms life might hurl our way. Because that unshakable foundation of love and trust was one pillar Garrett Hughes could never hope to crumble, no matter how greedily he indulged his worst impulses. With a contented sigh, I rose and began gathering our dishes, basking in the tender domestic ritual. The path ahead was rife with challenges, to be sure, but also brimming with possibilities neither of us could scarcely imagine yet. One thing was certain: the shackles of lies and moral cowardice had finally been shattered. Elise and I were free to author our own story on our own unbending terms. A sudden notification from my laptop caught my eye. I moved over and felt my eyebrows climb as the latest breaking news headline flashed across the screen. Disgraced money manager Garrett Hughes sentenced to 25 years in federal prison for orchestrating $120 million Ponzi scheme. A heaviness seemed to lift from my very soul as the words sank in. At long last, the ultimate cosmic arbitration had been delivered. Garrett's insidious misdeeds would no longer corrupt and metastasize in the shadows. He alone would answer for the countless lives he'd callously upended in pursuit of ill-gotten fortunes. Poetic justice, whether he was spiritually capable of appreciating it or not. Elise peered over my shoulder at the screen, her unburdened expression hardening into one of cool stoicism. Without a word, she reached past me and emphatically closed the laptop, shutting out her father's sins like a swiftly banished ghost. Our eyes met, shining with mutual catharsis. Betrayal and trauma had bent but not broken us. If anything, the lacerating trials had galvanized our resilience into an indestructible foundation to build anew. As a fresh wave of morning sunlight washed over us, I made a silent vow to ensure the remaining years of Elise's childhood would be swaddled in unconditional warmth, wisdom, and renewed family bonds. Crossing the space between us, I pulled my daughter into a fierce, lingering embrace. When we at last parted, our faces reflected brilliant mirrors of steadfast love and hope for the future shimmering just over the horizon. For while Garrett Hughes's karmic path ended in a prison cell, ours continued to hell. Ever onward, uplifting, inspiring, and blazing towards brilliant new horizons of our own authoring.